Yes. Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambrot Weber, and I am with,
Joshua Lamens from Radio Warrior.
thank you, Joshua. And today we're with our extraordinary guest, Kevin Annett, who is the field secretary of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, which is also sponsoring the International Common Law Court of Justice. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Alfred, and hi, Joshua. It's good to be with you guys again.
I'm now going to turn the floor over to Joshua. Please go ahead, Joshua.
Thank you. Kevin, I've got a couple of questions. I'm just wondering if there's been an update on Vivian Cunningham, the soldier that was incarcerated in the UK.
Yes, there is. As a matter of fact, I heard from a woman who's been kind of our liaison with him. As for people who don't know, Vivian Cunningham was an Irish Guard soldier who last month in England brought to the attention of his captain, the captain in his regiment, the fact that our standing citizen arrest warrant against Queen Elizabeth, against Elizabeth Windsor, for crimes against humanity, that this warrant was in existence, that there was a website discussing this, and he felt it was his obligation to report it. Simply for reporting that, he was incarcerated in a mental hospital in Stafford, in England. He's been in there for weeks, undergoing serious medication and confinement against his will, against the will of his family. He's been held incommunicado, and clearly it's our position they're making an example of him to other soldiers who have been issued, for example, the stand-down orders to all agents of the Crown that they should not obey the dictates of a convicted criminal, like the head of state of England and Canada and other Commonwealth countries. So Vivian Cunningham has been in that hospital for weeks. We understand that because of all of the public pressure, they are considering releasing him next Tuesday, in about a week. And that's the report I got just last night from the woman who's been speaking to him. Also, it's clear that they've been getting constant phone calls, people going by the hospital asking about him. As with the case of David Compans, one of our members in England, who is similarly incarcerated in a mental hospital, it was public pressure that's been forcing their release. So, it's part of the bigger fact that in England, they have this law which allows you to be put in a mental hospital if you make certain accusations against the Queen or the monarch of England or other heads of state and other politicians. So, this is part of a bigger problem, but clearly it's been this kind of public pressure that's forced his release for now.
Okay. Another question. For I heard that the head of the Jesuits is possibly retiring from the Vatican. I know there's been rumors going around, and it might be due to damage control. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, but this is actually something that in our interview last Friday that Alfred and I did, I forgot to mention. And it actually hadn't been in the news at that point, even though it had been announced on the 20th of May. It was kept really below the radar screen of the world media for obvious reasons, because this is a very important thing. In fact, should be kind of the key item in the program today, that Adolfo Pachon, the head of the Jesuits, was one of the three chief defendants in the court case involving global child trafficking, and now, as the evidence comes out, actual involvement in child sacrificial rights, involving the other defendants, Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, and Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. All three of them have been positively identified as taking part in those rituals by two eyewitnesses in Europe. Now, Adolfo Pachon the other day announced that he was going to step down as head of the Jesuits, Superior General of the Jesuits, at the next Congress, the 36th Congress of the Jesuits. These congresses aren't convened very often, but apparently they're being this next one's being convened specifically to deal with his resignation. Now, it's interesting. He's the third top Vatican official to step down while in office after being charged and indicted by our tribunal and by the Common Law Court for crimes against humanity. Joseph Ratzinger, of course, Pope Benedict stepped down while in office. That hadn't been done during peacetime in history at all, and no pope had ever done that before. And then another person named in the indictment in the original case we brought concerning genocide in Canada, Tarcisio Bertone, the Secretary of State for the Vatican, he also stepped down. So Paschon is actually the third one to be named by our tribunal, and then he resigns. Now, Bergoglio himself is also talking about resigning. This is quite amazing. He dropped a comment the other day that, in fact, he might step down from office. So I mean, all of this is, I think, directly related to the fact that they're being named in these cases with fairly solid evidence.
Now, when you hear of these rumors about Bergoglio or the head of the Jesuits, and it says the Vatican is circulating rumors, how do you hear from them? Because people say, well, how did you hear? How did you find out about these rumors, and where do they come from?
Well, there's a number of different sources. First of all, people we've been working with in Italy for a number of years, including the Francesco Zanardi. He's a member of a abuse survivors group in Savona, Italy. He has connections in the Italian media, and that's one of the sources. Certain reporters have definite ins inside the Vatican, and he's been getting information that way. There's political contacts they have as well in Rome, several of the political parties there. But also there are sources right within the Vatican. As a matter of fact, one of these sources have, in fact, released documents to the court making reference to these ninth circle sacrificial cults and the rituals. So, it's coming from a number of different, very credible sources. And in fact, one of these same sources is the fellow who released, I'm assuming it's a man because it's the Catholic Church, but it could be a woman. This person released that 10 years ago to the London Observer. He's the same one who released from the Vatican secret archives that document Crimen Solicitanus, which orders Catholic priests to cover up child abuse as a policy. And so, it's coming from definitely within inside.
So you're getting this information. Do you have your own Vatican insiders that are helping you and giving you information?
Indirectly, not to me personally, but definitely to people we work with in Europe.
Okay. The next question is how close, for instance, you have public affidavits, you have video footage. When will this information be released prior to the verdict of the court case going on now, or as it is ongoing? A lot of people are emailing and asking if any of this is going to become available.
Well, some of it has become available. There have been 3 bulletins put out already, and you can, if you go back through the back postings of itccs.org, you'll see that there something called the Public Information Agency. The court is putting out information bulletins summarizing aspects of the evidence that have been presented. Now, the video footage and the more detailed stuff like names and dates and all that will not be released till after the verdict comes out. That's what was told to me. Because it might compromise witnesses, it might affect, the verdict of the court and that kind of thing. You don't normally do that in the course of a trial, especially when things are being held in camera like they are where the court is occurring because of, for security reasons and to protect the eyewitnesses. Have
you been told when the verdict's going to happen? Is it going to be 6 months, a year? How close are they getting to a possible verdict?
It's going to be a matter of several months, if not longer. It was talked about the other day that it might be up to a year because not only is like one rabbit hole leading to another on this stuff. I mean, the stuff about the sacrificial rites, there's more stuff coming out all the time that this is a very old thing, and they want to connect all the dots. They want to have, corroboration for what people are claiming. So they're doing a lot of research, but they don't have a lot of resources on the ground. So it's very grassroots, the work they're doing. And, so it's a longer process than would be if it was a normal court. That's one of the reasons. I think just the volume of evidence involved is one of the reasons it's taking so long, longer than was expected.
Yeah, I know this question's been asked before, but it comes at me a lot. What power does a common law court of justice have? Why is it that the Catholics seem to be, resigning and retiring? What kind of power does a common law court of justice have, a court of the people, and how does it supersede federal, provincial, and legislated laws that are out internationally in today's world?
Well, if people do a little bit of research, you'll see judgments going back centuries, especially in England, and it says time and again that the common law is the ultimate jurisdiction of all law because it arises from nature, it arises inherently. It forms the basis of all constitutional government. Whereas admiralty law, canon law, these are statute-based laws that are brought in by corporate bodies as rules to govern themselves, whereas common law is the law of the land, the law of nature. and cannot be superseded lawfully by any other legal system. I mean, that's just written in stone. Now, the problem is that people have been brainwashed to think that they are under the authority of governments, when under natural law, it's the other way around. Under the Creator, there are people, and then under people, there's government. So people themselves, men and women, and this is the whole basis of the jury system, men and women have the sovereign right to form courts of law that are binding authority. And jurisdiction and sovereignty arises from the people directly, not from the government. That's kind of an unlearning people have to do, because they might immediately equate legitimacy with whether a government or a corporate body has approved it or not. That's not the bottom line. It's whether the people, gathered together in the form of a lawful court, a court of record it's called, whether they have the authority, and they in fact do. So it's really a matter of kind of awakening again to our inherent obligations under natural law.
That brings me to what you're doing right now. I've been following a few different articles about the structure of the common law court sheriffs. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening with that?
Well, yeah, there's, again, at itccs.org, we put up something recently about this. As of 2 days ago, there have been a total of 261 volunteers all over the world to do the training as a common law peace officer. Now, this would be in order to enforce the warrants, the standing arrest warrants against people like Elizabeth Windsor, Prime Minister Stephen Harper of Canada, those others who have already been convicted in the first common law court case. It's also to protect the court. The common law sheriffs, any sheriff, has the right, like in America, to convene juries, to convene courts, to perform arrests. It would be training people to do exactly that as citizen peace officers. Now, of those 261, 103 of them are based in America, nearly half. And that's where a lot of the training is going on, because in America, people have that understanding and system in place already that the people can do this on their own. The county sheriffs are elected and accountable to the people, not the federal government. They have a grand jury system, which is a check and balance on the existing judicial system. All of that means Americans are a lot more confident in doing this. About 50 of those people are from Canada, around 50 from England, and then a couple of dozen each in Australia and New Zealand, and then about a dozen other countries. So it's very much a phenomena in the English-speaking kind of common law-based world for now. And we think that this is the next important step to equip people with the enforcement capacity to actually show people that, yeah, these are verdicts that can and will be enforced. They aren't just symbolic decisions.
I hear you're going to be also doing a training video for the sheriffs. When is that going to happen or be done?
Well, that's one of the things in the works. We are just probably over the next week or two. These are some of the things that are being planned. The thing where I'm finding working with people is there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of people stepping forward, but there isn't a lot of knowledge and expertise. We have so far 5 sheriffs in America who have actually stepped forward and have offered to help train people. These are serving sheriffs that are going to be a resource. Now, that's really invaluable because it means it'll be professionally organized that way. But at the same time, this is for people, and part of the whole learning process is trying things out. Trial and error, and the important thing is to start the process, and people learn on the ground a lot of these things.
That brings me to, this is all basically comes from common law and natural law. And I know Alfred will have a few questions who, with exopolitics, talks about really natural law of the universe, which combines everything that we're really doing. Alfred.
Well, yes, I'd like to just to begin to follow up on some of the questions here. Kevin, if we go back to the case of Pope Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger, and the circumstances that led to his resignation. Now, as I understand it, some of the circumstances that led to his resignation was that following a verdict by the International Common Law Court of Justice, finding him guilty of child genocide and other crimes. Those findings were then taken to a nation state in Europe that then approached the Vatican Secretary of State with the information and said, "Look, we're going to move to arrest Joseph Ratzinger for his involvement in child trafficking." And then it was a conference, and it was based on that then a decision was made to have Ratzinger resign, but stay within the confines of the Vatican so he wouldn't be arrested. And then Bertoni himself resigned also. So in that model, the court would go to the existing system, say either at the nation state level or police level, and ask them to enforce a judgment. Is the court thinking about doing this in other cases, say the case of Francis or the case of Elizabeth Windsor or any other of the defendants?
Absolutely, and that was all correct what you said. That was the sequence of events. And we understand now that the whole game plan was to shift focus onto Bertoni. He was the straw man out there to distract people, when in fact we know for a fact that he's not actually the Pope.
You mean to shift focus onto Bertoni? Is that what you mean?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
That's right, away from Ratzinger, because here's some just indications of that. Ratzinger has been living in the Vatican ever since, and clearly with the protection of the Italian government, because they have the power to actually extradite him at any point, but they're not doing that. And Bertoni is walking around without any security. He's walking around making private statements.
Oh, you mean not Bertoni?
I'm sorry, not Bertoni. Bergoglio. I'm sorry.
Bergoglio.
When I've been saying,
yes.
Hey, I'm 58. What can I say? But when I said Bertoni, I meant Bergoglio.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, so Bergoglio, Bertoni's right out of the picture. And in fact, the other day I just noticed that he's been accused of embezzling 50 million euros out of the Vatican Bank recently. So,
Who has been?
Tarcisio Bertoni, the former Secretary of State.
Okay.
That was right on one of the Vatican websites. So anyway, the whole game plan was to get so-called Pope Francis Bergoglio to create a big distraction. Now, he clearly is not the Pope. He doesn't reside in the Vatican. He has no security around him, and at a critical time like this, that's the last thing they would do if he was a serving Pope, to have no security, walking around the streets of Rome, making individual comments on Vatican policy that the cardinals then disavow. I mean, clearly the guy is not in wearing the papal hat.
Okay, for a commoner or your basic Catholic, I could say you're kidding. So what if he doesn't have security? Maybe he doesn't want security. How does that verify that he's actually not the Pope when the whole world says he's the Pope? How politically can you place that in by verifying he's not the Pope by your statements?
Well, common sense. Does Obama walk around without Secret Service? No head of state operates without certain protocols. If those protocols aren't there, then obviously he's not the guy. Why would he be making pronouncements on policy that the cardinals would then say don't reflect church policy? When the whole purpose of the Pope is, while he's sitting in the papal chair, is to make, quote, infallible comment, proclamation about policy.
Because technically he speaks for God, is what...
Well, in their mindset, yeah. But the point is, even according to the rules, he's not playing by the game. So, another key indication of that, too, is there was the fellow who replaced Ratzinger as head of this very powerful body called the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's, in fact, the Modern Inquisition. He also, this Gustav Müller, his name is, he's another German, and he's in continual battle with the Latin American clique that are now around Bergoglio. And they are making completely contradictory statements. In fact, the CDF is not responsible just for doctrine in the Catholic Church.
Okay, the CDF is
Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith.
okay.
It's also the one that oversees clergy and is responsible for enacting this policy of crimen solicitatis, of covering up child rape. So, I mean, there's a clear power struggle going on between those two factions. And why would the head of the Vatican Bank and this head of the CDF both be Germans if, in fact, the Latin Americans are now running the Vatican, which normally happens when you have a new pope come in, he brings in his people. So a lot of things aren't making sense. And, I think that this is kind of an indication of that these people are definitely on the defensive. Why else would top officials be talking about resigning and stepping down after being publicly indicted for these horrible crimes?
Do the globalists have some control over the finances from the Vatican concerning that?
Well, that again is speculative. I mean, the thing about the Vatican Bank is nobody knows how it operates. It's a secret organization. You can't audit it. You don't know who its directors are. I mean, there has been a lot of speculation. There have been the reports from some Italian reporters that large amounts of money have been leaving the Vatican Bank and going into German and Chinese banks. But again, this is it's the hard evidence that's often lacking. But it's kind of like when we began to do the work in Canada about the residential schools. You can often tell by big institutions how they react or don't react, what the truth really is. Mm-hmm. Classic example I've had of that is the first time we held a protest outside the United Church office in Vancouver, December 1995. A Native woman came and made reference to seeing a little girl called Maisie Shaw get murdered mm-hmm. in the Alberni residential school. The same day, the head office of the United Church releases a press statement saying that they had no knowledge of her death and they didn't cover it up. Well, the thing is, at that point, no one had accused them of cover-up. No. So why would they immediately jump and make a comment that they didn't cover up anything unless, in fact, they had and had a guilty conscience about it and were worried about the truth coming out? That's what we're talking about. When we say you can look at the reactions, we're kind of like the mosquito in the elephant's ear. We can provoke them, and you can use common sense to interpret, what they're saying doesn't jive with the official line. There's something else going on here.
Mm-hmm. Alfred?
Well, yes. Shifting again back onto Pope Francis. I kind of call them the inside Pope and the outside Pope. But this past week he went to Israel and made a very unusual statement, public statement, whereby he said that he would meet with survivors of sexual abuse. And he says sexual abuse is horrible because it's like participating in a satanic mass. Now, that can be read in many, many ways, because of course he's a defendant at the Brussels trial, and the acts that he's accused of is participating in satanic rituals at which sexual abuse of infants and children take place, and ritual murders of these infants and children take place after the sexual abuse. So one can question whether this is a diabolical statement. At full measure, this is a conscious diabolical reversal by a knowing defendant in plain sight, just
right.
Reversing everything because he knows that he has control of the world mainstream media, and therefore thereby brainwashing the entire world. And
right.
And do you think, because you're in possession of a lot of knowledge here, both as connected to the to the trial and also seeing what this person has done, that Pope Francis, do you think that what we're witnessing is a conscious world brainwashing by Bergoglio when he did this act? Is this a conscious world brainwashing?
Well, it's several things. It's that, and it's something also much simpler. Like, and this happens all the time, and spin doctors tell this. Let's say you're a corporate director and you're caught having sex with your secretary. What you do is you go out and you say, well, of course I had sex with my secretary. I do it all the time, and you laugh about it. And people think, oh, it's a joke, and that's how you blow away the issue. You know, at a simple public relations level, that's exactly what Bergoglio just did. He said, made reference to satanic mass in relation to the rape of children. Partly that's a way to diffuse the fact that he's been publicly accused of that by eyewitnesses. But it's also, by his statement, under the law, it shows a tacit knowledge, awareness of a chain of events. He's saying that he's aware that child rape of children, the rape of children in the Catholic Church is linked to satanic masses. That's what he said by his statement. He has knowledge of that. So in a way, it's a tacit admission of guilt on his part, especially when he's being publicly accused of that at the very time he's making that statement. But it's also, you know, kind of like hiding something in plain sight, and I think it's a psychological technique. All of that is true, but it doesn't take away from the fact that by saying that, he's almost, you know, saying, yeah, it's true, but we're the Vatican, what are you going to do about it? You know, we've seen this behavior often in popes, and, you know, it's partly because of the fact that they literally think they're God and they can get away with this stuff.
Now, can't the prosecutor, I mean, I'm just thinking as a former judge and, you know, a lawyer here, but can't the prosecutor take those public statements and incorporate them as further evidence? I mean...
He is. Yeah, there's a thing that's gone out today, and the prosecutor made a statement from Brussels that said exactly that his statement is being entered into the evidence, showing that Jorge Bergoglio has a implicit and tacit understanding of the crime of which he's been accused, and that shows that in fact it's more verification of his guilt is the way he's framing it. And you know, I agree with him that kind of remark coming at this time in this context is really quite telling, and I think that it's you know, it's more proof of what they're talking about.
So that remark really is further evidence that Bergoglio, Pope Francis, is a knowing, a defendant that has knowingly fled from the proceedings. Is that
yes,
correct?
And yeah, I mean, somebody said to me, well, maybe he just made a Freudian slip, you know, kind of a guilty conscience speaking. But no, I think it's their approach to issues, which is, you know, in a way isn't even in the issue. What's going through their mind isn't the issue. Under the law, he's just given more ammunition to the prosecution, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, also, my feeling is that it's quite calculated. That this is something that is quite calculated. Is that correct?
Do you mean his statement at this time?
His that yes, his statement was
Do we have the statement?
That his statement that that child abuse is like saying a satanic mass was calculated.
Yeah, I think that presiding at a Catholic mass or participating in a satanic mass,
yes.
I think was the quote.
Yeah.
And
that is quite calculated because it came out after one of our major interviews and statements came out that we're going back and forth in sort of a public tennis match. What do you think about that?
Sorry, I didn't get that last part, Alfred. Could you repeat that?
Okay. I've been following. Let me kind of lay a premise here.
All right.
And that is that I've been following Bergoglio and his actions and his public statements.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that his statements are calculated, and they're like volleys of information that go back and forth between the court and Bergoglio's public statements. And the court makes an announcement, or yourself will go on an interview and it'll go public, and then Bergoglio will go public and make a statement.
Right. He will respond.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly. Now, what's amazing, Alfred, about all that is that we've had the same experience in Canada over 18 years, that we will do something, in our efforts to expose the crimes in the Indian residential schools, and the government and the churches will soon after that respond, but they won't refer to our evidence. They'll make it look like, they'll spin it in their direction. That's classic spin operation. But it's very true that every time new evidence has come out in the course of these trials, they will respond in some way. And, it's amazing how blind and deaf the world is, because they don't seem to make that connection. That is in response to what's being exposed about them.
Can you explain a little bit, Kevin, about the Satanic Mass and how the Catholic Church is involved with that?
Well, it's kind of a generic term, Satanic Mass. There's various groups that document this very well, including people who I've eyewitnessed who are intergenerational survivors. That is, they're born into satanic families who either kill children at birth or raise them as part of the coven. And
is that in any way also connected with the Ninth Circle?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Now, within these ceremonies, time and again, people make reference to either the participation of Catholic cardinals and bishops, like in the case of Tos Nienhaus, whose May 8, 2013 interview is up at itccs.org. She goes into this, how the satanic rituals tended to be held in Catholic cathedrals in the basements. Notre Dame Cathedral, Marie Reine de Monde Cathedral in Montreal, places like that. But not only that, but the ritual itself parallels and imitates the Catholic Mass. And so these are like parallel institutions, if you like, talking about the blood of Christ, saving people. The blood of the innocent in satanic masses is seen as a redemptive thing. So, they're really parallel rituals. And also, the Ninth Circle is not only being referred to by eyewitnesses. These are people who were part of it. But they're even made reference to in documents that I mentioned earlier that have actually been issued and submitted to the court, coming right out of the Vatican records themselves. It appears to be established with Jesuit influence at least 200 years ago. And it's expected that serving popes and other high officials in the church will all take part in these rituals, which involve the systematic rape, torture, and killing of children, and then the actual consumption of their blood and body. And it's who knows how these things go on. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, but it's well documented both by eyewitnesses and by these documents that the court apparently has.
Alfred.
Yeah. So that so that the formulation that I was putting forth is that whether it's the Jesuit intelligence agency or some Vatican intelligence agency is monitoring the court proceedings and is advising Bergoglio and Pachon and all of these defendants on what moves they should take, and then is coming out and advising them to make these statements, which are actually satanic MK Ultra type
right.
Public propaganda statements. This is how people, starting with Hitler up to George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, all of these statesmen have used uh, their positions to use speech this way, in a
Right.
very specialized way. And I've begun to identify, because I've been following his speech,
Hmm.
to identify Bergoglio is now identifying that and using his speech is very much uh, in a pattern of countering the actions of the court. And I just wanted to bring it up for your comment. Could you comment on
Right.
that?
I think you're on the right track there, Alfred. That my understanding of some of the techniques in MK Ultra mind control is normalizing certain things which you want the general population to adopt as their own thoughts. Equating the rape of children with satanic rituals is one of the ways to do that. In other words, by them saying it rather than us, they think that they can control the outcome. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're saying?
Yeah, i.e., that they assume that most of the world population is unconscious about what's going on in Brussels.
That's yep. Mm-hmm.
And so they have the Pope get up there, who's been built up by the Illuminati-controlled mainstream media into this arch figure, into this mean figure, and so he, in this statement, does what we call reversals. He links abused children with satanic masses, which are the two elements of the indictment, and reverses them in public statements so that the public mind becomes inoculated against the indictment and inoculated against any revelation of exposure of any witnesses who say, oh, Pope Francis was involved in sexual abuse at satanic masses.
Well, it's a two-edged sword, because it may do that with a lot of the people, but for the conscious minority who are already aware of the court, it reaffirms what we're doing, and it makes that conscious minority even more convinced of the correctness of that it's true that he's involved in these things. So it is a double-edged sword, and I think it's an act of desperation that they feel they have to do that.
Yeah. This is the same principle of how they've kept 9/11, the fairy story versus the official version.
Right.
And they just hold this lie in plain sight. Well, this is how they keep a pope who is in fact a diabolical fiend.
Yep.
And hold him in plain sight. And I mean, I am shocked on a daily basis that I have colleagues and friends who I thought were reasonable, who even today and yesterday don't grok or get that Pope Francis is a diabolical fiend. They buy into him as a well-meaning liberal progressive actor. And these are people who are spiritual progressives, and they think of themselves as the cat's meow.
Well, it shows you how deep the conditioning goes.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know that Francis revealed that 3 Catholic bishops were under Vatican investigation for matters related to sexual abuse. The inquiries were proof that there will be no, I'm just reading this from an article, be no daddy's boys in the clergy who enjoy special privileges on his watch. Francis used strong language to denounce the sexual abuse of children by clergy, calling it a very grave crime, and saying that when a priest subjects a child to abuse, it is as if a priest was celebrating Black Mass as part of the satanic ritual. A statement said that the Pope is right. The priests, bishops, and cardinals who abuse children in front of the elders have just conducted a black mass. They have been involved in devil
Right.
worship. And this is in a basic common article.
You notice what he just did. Yeah, you notice what he does by that, Joshua, that he says other people are doing it. It's like other people doing it, when in fact he is the one who has done it, according to the eyewitnesses.
And the real sick thing is, he is admitting that these things are happening in his watch under the Catholic Church's auspices, and they're just being investigated. It's just abhorrent.
Well, not only that, too, he's a complete liar, because the Italian bishops came out last month and said, we will not report child abuse in the church to the local police.
Yeah.
And he came out and supported them. He said, yes, we stand by the policy of crimen salus satanas. So how can, on the one hand, he say it's a crime, and yet turn around and say, but we're not going to report it? You know, it's absurd.
It made a conclusion here that the Roman Catholic Mass is itself a black mass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man.
It's, that's a whole other program. We can talk historically about that. Yeah.
Right there. So in conclusion, what's happening, just to top it off on the ITCCS front and ICLCJ, what's happening with some of the movements of sovereignty and the common law court in North America? Is anything happening with that?
Well, like I say, over half the volunteers are right here on Turtle Island in North America. And there's a number of different directions that's being taken. There's a big movement in the Midwest arising out of something called Restore the Republic, which has got several thousand members, a lot of them farmers and local people all through the Midwest. They are basically operating from the understanding that there is no lawful government in America anymore. The courts and the government are de facto corporations that are not accountable to the people. And they're trying to restore the Republic, literally. They've been operating their own common law jurisdictions for a number of years, and they're linking up with us. And so that's one of the reasons that with them we are hoping to open a Midwest regional office, probably somewhere around Minneapolis, over the next few months, to actually coordinate the training of sheriffs, the opening of common law courts. Some of the issues they're involved are things like mortgage fraud, where they're going to U.S. Marshals and saying this judge is colluding with a mortgage company to grab this person's land and farm illegally, and arresting these judges, bringing charges against them. That's one of the big issues. Another one has to do, of course, with the family court system and how children are trafficked massively through the family courts and the so-called child protection agencies. That's another big issue. And so one of the things that we're realizing is, you know, we're talking a lot about criminal law cases of genocide, child trafficking by the Vatican, that kind of thing. But civil law is also under the jurisdiction of common law. It can be, any civil matter can be adjudicated. So we're recognizing the need to establish common law family courts that take, you know, issue habeas corpus writs and say, we're taking this issue out of the family court, putting it into a common law court so our children can't be trafficked. And that's another big thrust in the work. So, you know, this can cover any issue. And it's why so many people now are responding. They're realizing that this can apply to any aspect of their lives that's you know, operating under tyrannical or unaccountable government.
Now, you in the near have stated a sovereign Canada in the territories of Canada. I know there's a group that wants to, in the Western Canada, to ally with Canada to create a sovereign territory. Why are these moves becoming so prevalent? Why are people wanting to, in a sense, to secede from the political systems?
Well, because there is no lawful political system in Canada anymore. Like the Crown of England, as a disestablished authority, means that and this is the basis of the Stand Down Order, directed against the police, the members of Parliament, the judges in Canada, like in England, there is no legitimate authority anymore. So that authority has to be reconstituted. The whole point is that and we've had people do this all over now. More and more people are taking the Stand Down orders. We just had a guy in Northern Alberta who sat down with the local RCMP in Slave Lake and said, look, you guys don't have any authority over me. The Crown of England is disestablished as a power. You will not have any authority until it's given to you by the people. And so what we need is kind of a political framework for all this that will actually give legitimacy to the common law courts. We need a constitutional convention where all the people, including, and it would have to be a federated republic, of course, involving all the different indigenous nations, whether or not they want to be part of it or not. But, they need a new constitutional framework in Canada. And that's kind of what's behind the whole move. Otherwise, there is no, there may be a legal power, a de facto power, but it's not lawful.
Yeah.
And and that's kind of the general idea.
And we technically Canada does not have a constitution.
No.
Rights and freedoms legislation is not a constitution, and it can be changed by any province or government at any time as they, see fit.
Yeah, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada is a statute that can be revoked by Parliament at any time. It's not an inherent proclamation of common law and the liberties of men and women here.
Beings, yeah.
Yep.
Alfred, any last questions or thoughts?
Well, I'd like to follow up with some questions on this particular issue. Kevin, there's been some long-standing public opinion polls on a large sector of the Canadian public, mainstream, that supports Canada being a republic. And in fact, I can recall the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, John Manley, who is a Republican, who supports a Republic of Canada openly. And so so this is throughout Canadian society, so that there are people throughout Canadian society as presently structured, I think up to 50%. I think you may know more what the current opinion polls are. And so the whole concept of seceding from the Crown as the head of state actually has a large measure of control of support, and that narrow issue can take place without, relatively easily, and that is now there's been a measure within the Harper government to try and forestall that by renaming some of the agencies Royal this and Royal that, but that goes against number one, the public opinion polls, and number two, against the findings that the Crown is a criminal institution. So
right.
I'd like to discuss, more that this is more in the mainstream, that there's that wide mainstream support inside the existing institutions. All that would happen would be to remove the Crown as the head of state,
right?
And you could have a governor general be a head of state. You could make the prime minister be both the head of government and the head of state. It's just a small technical change.
That's in fact the game they would play. The kind of the mainstream idea of Republican government is you make the governor general the president, then everyone's happy. No, the latest opinion polls, 2006 they had one that said 58% wanted a republic. 2 years ago it's up to 62% now, so it's climbing. And close to 2/3 of Canadians see no need for any ties with a monarchy. Now, but we're not talking about just in a formalistic sense. We're not talking just that the problem is that there's this Crown. The whole nature of Canadian society is it's corporatized. There's no tradition of real, genuine, and I don't want to say democracy, because democracy is actually when sovereign men and women hand over their authority to a representative. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about keeping your sovereignty. When you look at the founding Federalist Papers in America, it said Every man and woman born is a sovereign unto themselves without rulers over them. That's what we're talking about a republic.
Yeah.
Sovereignty means people are self-governing. They're not
Right.
handing authority over to some corporation, some body, changing hats, and now they're called a republic, when in fact it's the same old game. We're talking about change from the bottom up, and this is our notion of what a republic really should be.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at now I see what you're talking about. If we go back to the public opinion polls, which I had a chance to Google, the latest public opinion polls is that only 28% support a monarchy, and that 50% really want to have this debate. So that's inside the mainstream.
I don't think
Right.
that within the 28% that they really realize that we are still controlled by a monarchy through the BNA, the British North America Act. I think people like the whole royals thing and having a queen that represents a commonwealth, but I don't think a lot of people understand how we are still under its rule.
Well, we are kind of, if it depends what box you're thinking. In the old box, formalistically we are, but in reality we're not. In any kind of real sense, it's always been a fictitious jurisdiction. Now that it's a convicted criminal body, it can literally piss off. It has no control over us. I mean, it's when people withdraw their mental energy, their allegiance in that way, that the thing falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, turning our attention, then we've talked about the Vatican, Rome, which is one of the three cities. The second city is London. The third, of course, is the U.S. But let's talk about London and as it affects Canada. So there's this action coming up, but there is the conviction both of the Prime Minister of Canada and of the government of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you were able to take some of the evidence from the trial that convicted the government of Canada. So, people wrote to me asking, "Oh, isn't that going to be a mistrial?" And I was able to say no, because that was on a previous action where a verdict has already been reached.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where there was there were former Nazi officers, SS officers, who were performing child torture on Canadian Armed Forces bases.
That's right.
And running national programs in Canada for child torture and kind of MKUltra operations throughout Canada, and that were connected to a Nazi organization of which Ratzinger was a member.
Right, the Knights of Darkness.
Yeah. So here we have these judgments of Canada and of the UK monarchy and of the sheriffs. And could you talk more about? And you have the volunteers who are now being trained as the peace officers, and there are 50 of them in Canada and 50 of them in the UK. Could you talk about how these warrants, how you see the enforcement process proceeding here?
Well, if it was only
the UK.
If it was only about 50 people, it wouldn't happen. The 50 are the spark that are going to mobilize a much larger number. This is about community enforcement. It isn't about arresting individuals, although that's part of it. It's really about disestablishing the institutions and the system that caused this genocide. So, for example, part of the enforcement procedure is the property and the assets of these churches and government. We're talking the Catholic, Anglican, and United churches that planned and perpetrated this genocide. they're all forfeited. So any group of citizens can seize those buildings. They can seize the assets lawfully. We need to create those movements that start that right at the grass levels in the community, and that's already begun. So the sheriffs are kind of like the figurehead of a much bigger movement. We do know that and here's to get very specific, one of the main crimes that occurred in Canada that Stephen Harper is personally guilty of is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is an enormous miscarriage of justice. The whole purpose of the TRC was to destroy evidence, was to stop the evidence of genocide being made public, of silencing witnesses, destroying grave sites, while distracting everybody with these like song and dance public forums where nothing was ever really said or allowed to be said. In fact, in the background, we saw a lot of this kind of destruction of evidence and silencing of the witnesses going on. And so the officers of that TRC, the people who put it in place, like Stephen Harper, Murray Sinclair, the chief judge in it, the heads of the churches that actually set it up, all of those people are guilty of crimes against humanity because they destroyed evidence and they colluded in covering up an enormous crime, and they're continuing to do it. So that aspect in itself is one of the main things that convicted these people at the first common law court case that came out, during the same 2 weeks that Ratzinger stepped down, the verdict of February 25th, 2013. All of that evidence is up online, itccs.org. The amazing thing is people can read that and see all the evidence, and it's amazing how you can look at that and yet there's been such a small ripple created by it. I think it's, what we talked about earlier, the extent of the mind numbing down and the brainwashing going on. People look at it and don't realize the enormity of the crime we're talking about and how these parties and governments are guilty and churches are guilty as charged. So the sheriffs themselves, their whole job is to mobilize the community to take action on that, to make sure that these crimes stop and aren't continuing. And we see they're continuing all the time. Look at the number of Native kids still being grabbed and put into child-raping foster homes. It's on the constant rise, and it's because of these crimes were never stopped.
Right. Well, I can see that we're coming to the end of this segment now. Do you have any words that you'd like to leave our listeners with, Kevin?
Well, it's like I said last Friday in our interview, Alfred. This is the whole. What I've seen in almost 20 years now is this escalates to such a high global level now. It's also escalated to a spiritual level. There's forces at work here that we are taking on, which are massive, and yet we're learning that there's guardians and strength that accompany us in this work that's giving us the capacity to carry on. And so I would really urge people that not only when you're taking on the enforcement end of this, but being involved in any aspect of this, you have to be inwardly prepared and strengthened. Really, as part of the work we do, we always involve smudging and prayer and, utilizing the traditions of people to find that inward strength to carry on. This is becoming very important these days, and especially as these attacks on us tend to increase as we're getting closer to the source of these crimes. So I would really urge that on people, but also urge everyone to go to our sites, join up in the common law sheriff and these direct action units we're forming to actually enforce the warrants and perform the citizen arrests. Find that work at itccs.org and write to me, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com.
Great. And where can people follow all of this online?
Well, not only the itccs.org site, but of course our Common Law Court of Justice site, iclcj.com. That has the stuff relating specifically to the courts that are in session as we speak.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Kevin and Joshua, for taking time out to join us today, and we look forward to your joining us again in the future as events develop.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alfred, and thanks, Joshua. We'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you later.
Great.
Okay.